Gumi has once again ignited a firestorm of debate across Nigeria with a video he posted on X today declaring that Fulani herdsmen are going nowhere and that Nigerians must learn to live with them. The controversial Islamic cleric made these bold statements at a time when the nation is still reeling from recent security developments, including the United States military airstrikes in Sokoto State that have stirred up tensions between religious communities and raised questions about Nigeria's sovereignty. In the video that appeared on his social media platform this morning, Gumi emphasized that herdsmen are an integral part of Nigeria and cannot be driven away by anyone, just as they cannot drive others away. He described them as neighbors who should never be regarded as enemies, warning that turning them into adversaries would spell doom for the country. The retired army officer turned cleric painted a picture of what he believes would be a catastrophic mistake, arguing that Nigeria's real enemies would exploit any animosity between settled communities and herdsmen to cause even greater harm to the nation. His reasoning centers on a simple but powerful idea that your neighbor knows your secrets better than anyone else. He stated that these herdsmen know when people leave their homes and when they return, making them either valuable allies or potentially dangerous enemies, depending on how they are treated. This argument suggests that creating hostility with a group so deeply familiar with the inner workings of communities across Nigeria would only invite disaster, as external forces could manipulate that relationship to destabilize the country further. The timing of this statement is particularly striking because it comes just 2 days after Gumi issued another controversial declaration condemning the United States military strikes in Sokoto. He had described those airstrikes as a neo-crusade against Islam, questioning why Sokoto, a predominantly Muslim state, was targeted on Christmas Eve when he believes the real epicenter of terrorism has historically been elsewhere. In that earlier statement, he called the United States another terrorist nation with blood on its hands from conflicts around the world, demanding that the Nigerian government immediately halt all military cooperation with Washington and instead seek assistance from what he termed neutral countries like China, Turkey, and Pakistan. These back-to-back statements reveal Gumi's consistent philosophy that military force and confrontation are not the solution to Nigeria's complex security challenges. He has maintained this position for years, arguing that dialogue, negotiation, and reconciliation are the only sustainable paths forward. His critics see this as giving comfort to criminals and bandits who have terrorized communities, kidnapped school children, destroyed livelihoods, and turned entire regions into zones of fear. His supporters, however, view him as a pragmatic voice calling for solutions that address root causes rather than symptoms. The herder-farmer crisis that Gumi references has been one of Nigeria's most persistent security challenges over the past decade. What began as disputes over grazing land and water resources has escalated into deadly clashes that have claimed thousands of lives across the Middle Belt and southern regions. Climate change has pushed herders further south as desertification encroaches on traditional grazing areas in the north, bringing them into direct competition with farming communities over increasingly scarce resources. Add to this mix the activities of criminal elements who have exploited these tensions to engage in kidnapping, cattle rustling, and armed attacks, and you have a crisis that defies simple solutions. Several state governments have responded by enacting anti-open grazing laws that require herders to adopt ranching systems. Proponents argue that ranching is the modern, sustainable approach that would minimize conflicts, improve animal health, and boost productivity while allowing farmers to secure their lands. However, these laws have faced resistance from pastoralist communities who view them as attacks on their cultural heritage and economic survival. The capital required to establish ranches, acquire land, and build necessary infrastructure is beyond the reach of most herders, raising questions about whether these policies are realistic or simply a way to push pastoralists out of certain regions. If you're finding this breakdown helpful and want to stay informed about the critical issues shaping Nigeria today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss any of our updates. Gumi's statement that herdsmen are going nowhere and must be accommodated represents a rejection of the idea that pastoralism can simply be wished away or forcibly ended through legislation or military action. He is essentially arguing that Nigeria must find a way to honor the rights and livelihoods of both farmers and herders simultaneously, rather than treating this as a zero-sum game where one group must win and the other must lose. This perspective acknowledges the deep cultural and economic roots of nomadic pastoralism within certain communities, especially among the Fulani ethnic group, who have maintained these traditions for generations. Critics of Gumi's position argue that he consistently downplays or excuses the criminal activities of bandits and armed groups, some of whom have committed horrific atrocities against innocent civilians. They point out that while he talks about dialogue and understanding, victims of kidnapping and violence continue to suffer with little justice or accountability. The hashtag #ArrestGumi has trended multiple times on Nigerian social media, with many calling for him to face legal consequences for what they see as his sympathetic stance towards criminals. Just days ago, Gumi himself filed a lawsuit against 2 social media users who allegedly published a false post attributed to him that threatened a military official, showing that even he draws lines when it comes to what can be said in his name. The broader question that Gumi's statement raises is whether Nigeria, as currently constituted, can accommodate the diverse ways of life that exist within its borders. Can a modern state with growing cities, expanding agriculture, and competing land uses find space for nomadic pastoralism? Can communities that have been traumatized by violence and insecurity be expected to embrace those they view as threats? Can herders who have lost cattle to rustlers and family members to vigilante attacks be expected to peacefully coexist with farming communities who may have participated or supported those actions? These questions don't have easy answers, which is perhaps why Gumi's statements continue to generate such intense reactions. Some see him as a voice of reason, calling for pragmatism and coexistence in a nation too often divided along ethnic and religious lines. Others see him as dangerously naive, or worse, as someone whose advocacy enables violence by removing consequences and accountability.